All right. So do you think we should begin?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. It's a small group, a wonderful group. Thank you, Bhavesh and Aditya for joining. So let, um, really excited to host Sharath today. Sharath is um, he's a leading expert on intrinsic motivation. He founded and started Stir Education back in 2012, and currently he's an executive chair at Intrinsic Labs. He was also elected as an Ashoka Fellow in 2014 and has been one of the 10 leading social entrepreneurs in 2019. He's also a published author of his recently published book called Intrinsic. So this conversation today is mostly about how can we understand our own motivation, whether we aspire to solve social challenges through our work, or whether we are looking at staying motivated online in these classes as the world has moved to virtual learning. So over to you, Sharath. Looking forward to see and hear your insights and see how you're going to do this.
Thanks, Anshul. So I think what we'll do is let me talk for about 15 minutes or so, which we can record and that can be shared with others, and then we can perhaps have an intimate discussion with Bhavesh, with you, and with Ditya as well, and talk through some of the ideas and see how it resonates. But just to set the context, I think that we've had this very challenging time around the world, but in India, this is a picture. I was on the beach with my kids. We're finally returning to some level of normality here in the UK, where I'm based. I was born in Chennai, but most of my life has been in the UK. And the real kind of image that came across to me was this idea of treading water. That we can tread water so long, but after a while, there's a risk of drowning. And there's that same image for motivation, right? That we've managed to get through this. Yes, most of us have been able to be okay. We're still studying. Most of us are still working. But it's not been a very easy period. And I think it's really important now as we come out of lockdown, both in India and other countries, that we think about how we can get swimming again motivationally. And one of the things we're trying to do around this with other universities, Cambridge University is another example where I did my undergraduate degree, is really think about how we can help. I saw in Ashoka University's one of its goals, that idea of a nurturing network and that collective action that you're trying to achieve, that we have that very vibrant civic society. I knew Ashish Dhawan from the very early days when Ashoka was still an idea. I think in his mind, that vision has always been a very important one. And I think what we're finding in universities around the world is this sense that, yes, the academics matter. And of course, you want to have high quality, rigorous academics around a subject. But what we really want to try to do is build a much broader student experience that helps young people, all of us on this amazing campus, to make the most of university life and try to be fantastic citizens in the world ahead of us. And so what I'm going to talk about today is some ideas that I've gained from writing my book, Intrinsic, and a lot of research around how we can do that to really make the most of university life. And being locked down, doing this stuff remotely, it's not ideal. But I know that now coming back to some kind of hybrid model, there's more opportunity now to make the most of that. So just to share a bit of my background, I spent the last 10 years working a lot in India, founding an organization, as Anshul mentioned, called Stir Education. It was all about reigniting the motivation of public school teachers across the country. States like Delhi, which in fact we were in every school in the capital with the government there, in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, and in UP, for example. It reached about 30,000 schools in India, about 60 lakh kids and about 2 lakh teachers across the country, all with the view of trying to reignite that intrinsic motivation in teaching and bringing that back to the forefront there. So the core insight, I think, though, what I learned from all that was that although there was a lot of theory on motivation, a lot of academic research, how to practically bring this to life was very challenging. It was certainly the most challenging 10 years of my life. And I think going back to the core insight of all this motivation thinking, the idea that what deeply motivates us is not the opposite of what demotivates us. Let me just repeat that. What deeply motivates us is not the opposite of what demotivates us. So, for example, money as a motivator, Indian teachers, for example, have had very, very rapid increases in pay over the years, but that's not done a lot for general motivation in the profession. I think in corporate India, for example, the social sector, many similar dynamics. What we're learning about pay is it's what's called a hygiene factor. It can reduce demotivation, but it's not a deep motivator for most of us. And that's true of working conditions, how nice the office is, all of these things we're learning as well. Similarly for incentives and so on. But increasingly what we're learning about motivation is that there are really three core pillars. I talk about a lot about them in the book that, and I spent a lot of time in taxis like this over the last 10 years. This one is in Bombay, but if you think about the kind of fuel that goes into a car, we're having a fuel shortage right now in the UK, so it's very, very live. But we can either drive cars on diesel fuel, which are a bit like extrinsic motivation, right? They can they get you from A to B, but it's not a very pleasant ride. There are lots of fumes, and it's a pretty toxic journey along the way. Intrinsic motivation, if you like, is really like driving an electric car. We are gliding through the road. It feels pleasurable, exciting, fulfilling in its own right. And if you take that car image further, think about purpose being that kind of destination we put into our GPS. It's that sense of how what we do helps and serves others. The sense of autonomy, being at the wheel, being that confident driver, right? Lots of times in India, there's always a backseat driver telling us how to drive. It's still feeling able to be at the wheel ourselves and authentically. And mastery being that better and better driver over time, whether someone's reversing into you or there's a bike, a bullock, or a pedestrian. How do we go on that journey of continual improvement? And what we're learning is that purpose, autonomy, and mastery, these three pillars, are really the critical drivers of deep motivation, intrinsic motivation, or internal motivation overall. Is that making sense so far? So what I talk about in the book is five aspects of 5 crises we're in motivationally in India, in the UK, but around the world really as well. And the first one is really going back to sort of that sense of our motivation at work being a key challenge. That right now, 85% of us around the world are either disengaged or actively disengaged in our work. I talk also about careers, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. How can we try and find really career paths that really are motivating for us, especially as we leave the school and college gates. I looked at the state of relationships, so marriages or with girlfriends and boyfriends. Why are we in this motivational mess where fewer and fewer of us are forming stable relationships? It's getting harder and harder to do. I looked at parenting and the rise of this really hyper anxious parent and child, and high rates of anxiety in our young people and children around the world. It's leading to suicide, depression, all these things. But how can we try to have better parenting styles using some of this motivation thinking? And finally, looking at our relationships with our politicians, our leaders in our countries, and how can we create a better partnership with them to help lead our countries in a better place overall. So the book is very broad. It talks about these 5 areas in quite a bit of depth. What I thought today would be more sensible to talk about is this kind of transition, if you like, in university life, and how can we think about these things. And what I thought would this idea of student motivation, really 5 key ideas or thoughts around the book that might help us in our lives as students. And I think starting with the first one about this idea of a wicked problem. I don't know if anyone in the room knows what a wicked problem is. Bhavesh or Ishka, Aditya, Devika, has anyone heard of this language around wicked problems, first of all? No? Okay, so let me ask a second question. Does anyone know what picture this is of right now? Can anyone identify what's in the picture?
These are the designs for SpaceX Mars settlement.
That's right, Aditya. Tell me more. So yeah, and when did this happen? Do you remember when SpaceX took place?
I don't exactly remember that.
So time is any other, yes, the time is a bit of a blur, right, during the pandemic, but this happened about a year and a half ago, like around May last year. And as you said, Elon Musk managed to get a probe into Mars through SpaceX. What was interesting with that was that it was a very, very challenging problem, but there was ultimately a technical solution to that problem, right? That's what we mean by a kind problem. There is ultimately a way of solving it. Within a few days of SpaceX, there's Black Lives Matter as a movement exploded across the US first, then across many global cities, at least in the West, where those questions about racial injustice, police behavior, but also this kind of sense of broader inequality and so on. There is no easy answer to that question, right? That's a classic wicked problem. There's no way to solve it. There's no technical solution towards getting there. And what I've been finding a lot is that people who are deeply motivated, especially young people, they really have a very, very strong sense of a wicked problem they want to solve. And some of you might have been hearing this sort of whole discussion about follow your passion. And Scott Galloway and others in some countries have been talking about this stuff. I do think that there can be very dangerous because I think a lot of times our passions are not very clear, especially as we're early in our careers. But this idea of being really fixed on that problem that you really want to help address and make a contribution to. So for me, the last 10 years, it's been about education, and specifically about education disadvantage and how can we help every child in India and in other countries have access to a good quality education. That's an ultimate wicked problem. This is the wicked of Oz from Dorothy and so on. But that kept me very motivated. And that evolved my role in how I want to solve that change from initially ideas to setting up an NGO to now advising governments in that area as part of what I do. But that North Star, that idea of purpose in the GPS, that stayed very constant. And I think what we're finding is in this world of, this is Donald Rumsfeld, I've seen a US, he talked about a world of unknown unknowns, right? And we're in that world, as the pandemic has shown. Really the big problems we want to face in our world right now are wicked problems. And I guess my first piece of kind of advice, I guess, or insight from the book is that if you guys can find a wicked problem you want to try to spend a good part of your lives, you'll never solve it, but contributing towards, that can keep us very, very motivated overall. And I think this was a nice quote from Adam Grant that tried to capture that. I use this in the book, but this idea that career success is no longer nowadays about finding the right solutions to the problems. It's about finding the right problem to solve. Yeah. The second thing I think is around engagement. And I know a lot of work happens at Ashoka around student engagement. But I think what happens a lot is we tend to plant a lot of technical seeds, right? You guys, I'm sure, are full with courses and offerings and electives and so on. But that soil of engagement around what we do is becoming so important nowadays. And this is my first boss in my days of strategy consulting. I worked for Booz & Company. It's now called Strategy. And after my undergrad at Cambridge and so on, and David Newkirk was the guy who hired me. And he had a very interesting way of interviewing people for consulting. He didn't ask any of the normal standard consulting questions. He didn't ask me how many ping pong balls are there in the world, or he didn't ask me to do some business case or whatever. Instead, he just asked me to talk about something I was passionate about. It could be tennis, it could be wine, it could be a number of things. And he would just ask more and more probing questions about that thing, really to test how deeply I'd gone. How far had I really exposed myself in that area? And what his sort of belief was that if someone engages in something deeply, they develop all kinds of transferable skills. Curiosity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, all of these things that they can take to almost anything they do, including the world of strategy consulting. So I didn't believe a lot in that now, but I think I have a lot of respect for what he did now as well. I was thinking about that idea of engagement. So again, as students, try to really keep that engagement piece there and really throw yourself into what you're doing. The third piece, the third lesson, I think, or learning from this is around talent today. And I think we all believe that we have talents that deserve to be recognized and nurtured. One of the challenging things that I was seeing is a lot of things around the world where young people feel cut out of those stories around their talent. So this is a picture from Palo Alto in the US, in California, where a lot, this was the train tracks, and a number of the government there had to basically put armed guards on the trains just to stop young people throwing themselves on the tracks. And these were some of the wealthiest kids in America, the sons and daughters of the Facebook execs, Google execs, etc. But that sort of idea of almost that fear of failure, the anxiety, those kind of rates, was becoming a real issue in places like Palo Alto. And I think what we're learning about talent and success today, and that's a big part of the book, is that the companies that are most successful, is a corporate example, they're the ones that really create new categories that are very distinctive in the world. And I think that applies to us as individuals as well. So rather than trying to be a little bit better than someone else, be 5% smarter, faster, whatever, how can we try to really be distinctive? And I went back to read Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species and some of the ideas there. He wasn't talking, he talked about survival of the fittest. He didn't mean just be, go head to head with other people. What he was talking about is being diverse. He was talking about diversity, I think, many centuries before it became a topic of note. The idea that if we can be diverse and bring something new, that has a big impact on us to be able to create really interesting career paths when we leave school and university. And just give a small example. I have a great accountant, for in UK does my accounting. He does the management accounts just fine, of course, but what he's able to do is a very, very exceptional people person. He builds good relationships, good communicator. He's been able to make that the core of what he does. And he's very distinctive and has a lot of clientele because of that core strength that not many other people have in his field. So finding the thing that makes you unique and different and trying to really focus on building that strength is another key thought there. Just the fourth and penultimate just thought really for this talk is around this idea of talent nurturers. And many of you here are too kind of young to know this song. Actually, I'm not sure I'm sure you're probably in the same camp here, but this was a very big song in the 70s. I was a kid of the 70s. And this idea of the winner takes it all from ABBA, that's becoming a real fear in many places, right? We often feel that, I'm sure you guys will find that on campus, one or two people or a few people will hoover up all of the job offers, for example, on campus. Not all, but many of them, for example, right? Or if we're in careers, a few people get promoted, those kinds of questions happen. And I think that's a really genuine issue that many of us fear. And what I did for the book is looked at how can we try to, if you like, offset this winner takes all world, and how do we achieve a place where all of our talents can be nurtured rather than just a few of us. And what I found is that a lot of the time is about whether we find the right nurture in our lives, on campus or in our wider lives more widely. And there were really very distinctive things nurturers did to help keep that spark in the people they were nurturing, the young people and students they were working with. And you might see some of this and recognize this in some of the lecturers you have on campus, maybe, or some of the broader counselors or other kinds of support systems you have. But it's really about really helping see the potential in everyone and helping each of you become the best versions of yourself you can be, not someone else. Then also really seeing you, very much as making sure you stay engaged in the activity, both your studies or extracurricular activities or other things you're responsible for, helping you build networks with each other. And finally, really trying to help you see the world differently, opening up new connections, new relationships, and asking good questions at the right time. So, I talk about in the book how, I wouldn't have got to Cambridge without a great nurture in my school life. And I certainly had many of those in my university life as well. But think about who might be a nurturer in your life right now, in especially during the time in Ashoka when you have some amazing people around you. And just the last thing I think is kind of perhaps the most controversial thing I'll say before I close is this idea of kind of ignoring your parents, at least most of the time. And I did a lot at STIR of, I would actually have parents' days when parents would come and talk to us about why they were anxious for their kids and what was on their minds also. But this is my son Ishan, he's now 10, and one of the things that we were doing, I'm a huge tennis nut. I love tennis as a sport. He was actually a pretty good tennis player, and he got into various kind of we call them county here, so I guess like state level, competitions and so on. And then we spent a summer together in India. He came to Bangalore with me, and he got into cricket in a big way. And since then, he's not been anywhere near as passionate about tennis. So I feel quite sad about it, to be honest. But at the same time, I feel like it's really important for him to find out what really he's excited by. And I was living my dreams partly through him, in all honesty. So now, we play tennis together recreationally as something fun to do, but his love is really in the cricket, on the cricket pitch. And I think that idea that, I think as parents that we often, I guess, project our lives onto our kids. And I think we often forget our lives themselves. We're very crooked and very much like a zigzag. But I think the way we tell our stories to our kids often is as a straight line, right? That it was very straightforward. I went from A to B to C, and this beautiful sort of story happened where it was all perfect. That's rare to happen overall there. So just want to close off. We'll open up for discussion in a second, but just the 5 things I wanted to recap, and we'll stop the videoing. But this idea again of just the idea of how important it is to find the right wicked problem to solve. Something that you're really passionate about, where you almost dissolve into the problem. It's so big that it keeps you excited and engaged. The second thing is just how important it is to stay engaged in what you do on campus. There's no point sleepwalking. I think it's only through really engaging deeply, both academically and in your extracurricular life, that you develop those transferable skills that really will push you and help you do whatever else you want to do in your life. The third aspect about this idea of helping, really finding your own unique strengths and talents and playing to those things, not trying to be like everyone else or copying everyone else, but really figuring out what makes you distinctive and what keeps you ticking. The fourth piece around being that great nurturer, finding that person in your life and on campus and beyond can really help you be the best version of yourself. And this idea of, our parents tend to project stories that are not always realistic on us. How can we try and make sure we understand what they did rather than what they say? And that idea that life is very much more a zigzag rather than a straight line. So what I'm just going to just close off is just my book Intrinsic's out. There's a lot more depth on that topic and some of the ideas there. We'll open up for discussion in a second. But it was so nice to talk to young people all over India and all over the world about some of the trends we were seeing around this element of student life. And please stay in touch around some of the ideas. It's very much available on Amazon and Kindle and so on as well. But also we're very, very keen to engage students around the ideas in the book and see if there may be ways to create conversations around the ideas as well. So thank you. So let's open up for Q&A, guys. But hopefully it makes sense. I'd love to just see how these ideas resonate for all of you and what your thoughts are. Sounds good. Thanks so much. Should we stop recording and then we can just open up to a very open discussion about some of this?
Sure. I was wondering if you could record the Q&A as well.
Yeah, sure. Just checking, Bhavesh and all the guys here. Are you happy with that? No issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Sure. So, any questions from people? Please feel free to ask or put them in the chat box. Nishka, please go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. It was a really interesting talk. I think I had never encountered the wicked problem before, so that was interesting. I have 2 questions. The first one being that from my experience in just, the social sector or what I've heard other people talk about it, is that you have to sort of learn to sit with uncertainty. There's just a lot of uncertainty and it's difficult. And I think for me as like a teenager, I could not do that. I was really struggling and I was impatient. And so I was just wondering what might your thoughts be on, sitting with the uncertainty that comes with any sort of role in the social sector. So.
It's a great question. And I think that's one of the things that's very difficult about the social sector, because there's so much ambiguity there, right? And often from funding all the way through to even the problems we're trying to solve are so immense that we're never really fully sure whether we've really made a dent or not. So what I'd probably say on that one is to, again, this idea of the results of what we do are often very long term. They take a long time to measure around that. So that's why I think the idea of just engaging what we do very deeply now and trusting that if we do it really with the fullest of our abilities, it will lead to good outcomes in the long term. So I think a lot of things around like process indicators about, are we, for example, let's say we're contributing to the issue of education. Are we ensuring that that governments are engaging in our work, for example? It might be a first thing to think about. Are we getting good feedback from the people we're trying to serve, ultimately, young people or children? Those questions come up. And if those are happening, that's a good proxy that we're on the right lines. It might take a while for that to factor into things like measurable academic outcomes, for example, or those kinds of things. And I think what I've found in the social sector is when we try and go too fast and push those outcomes too directly, we tend to take shortcuts. And we don't always really, we try to make the wicked problem a kind problem, if you like. We try to take the easy parts of it. So we may work with, higher income kids, for example, or work with kids who are easier to serve, or try to do a short-term fix that doesn't really solve the underlying problem. So that's why I think if we stay focused on the problem and really understand that our solutions, how we contribute that will evolve over time, that gives us humility, but also gives us that chance to learn and adapt and evolve our approaches over time as well. I don't know if that answers your question, Ishkan, as well on that.
That does answer, and it's sort of drawing into my second question, which is that so I was just wondering, how do you sort of maintain a good amount of connection to what you're doing, to the people that you're working with? Because I think one problem that I have personally encountered is that maybe I get too involved and their circumstances might tend to disturb me. On the other hand, you don't want to get disconnected. So yeah, just that balance.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of research now, Anushka, on this side, the value of staying connected. And one of the things I talk a lot about in the book around is purpose, and this idea of that helping and serving others, and staying very, very close to people we're working with is very important. So we really understand their lives deeply and understand what changes we are and aren't making. That was one thing I always felt with, still I was traveling a lot to India and other parts, but not being based there all the time. That was always sometimes a challenge there to keep that. That is very important. But I think also having some perspective that, and the humility that we can't solve everything, right? That there are things in people's lives we can only we can make our difference. We can make a dent in the world, as Steve Jobs would say. But ultimately, other people have also got to play a role. And right now I advise a lot of organizations, from universities to companies to governments and so on. And you can't solve everything. You can make a difference in the area that you were brought on to. And if you do a good job, you've just got to trust that that'll make a difference, and they'll find other people to support them in other areas, I think. So yeah, keeping a little bit of that distance, but also being close to the people we're serving, I think is very important.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Anyone else has a question? Otherwise, I have one for you, Sharath. I was wondering, so I know about STIR education, how, the government school system teachers are not as motivated for various reasons. And then I was trying to map these 5 points to how we design our solution, say in the education space or in different social impact spaces. So if you have an example that you can take us through to show how did you map these to the work that you created or the solutions that you created?
And do you mean, Anshul, mapping the problem and the solution, those two things together?
Yeah, and what kind of challenges that you faced, or what kind of insights that got created when you map this framework to the solution?
Yeah, so if you look at education, when I started working with STIR in India and setting it up in about 2012, we started STIR really with the idea that this was a way to find ideas from teachers, we called them micro innovations at the time. And the challenge we learned was that was useful, and we learned this directly in the slums of Delhi, working and trying to find these ideas. But actually what we were doing was reigniting the motivation of teachers. And this didn't happen by any great insight. They just called us so often that, in our office in Delhi saying, look, I know my idea was or wasn't selected, but you've ignited something I haven't felt for a long time. That wasn't part of the plan in our log frames and all this stuff. We didn't have any of this. We were trying to find these ideas so we could spread them. Motivation felt very fuzzy, very open-ended, very ambiguous, I think, to use a word that someone else used earlier in the session. And so it was really hard, but I think we had to have the courage and say, look, we've confused the baby and the bathwater in a way, right? That what we've done by accident really is the core of what we do. And we need to make sure we take that on and listen to the people we're serving and say, how can we be most useful? And we mapped the education space. What we found was everyone was doing, there were many great organizations out there. There was Pratham, there was, a whole number of them, but they were all focusing on the seeds that I showed earlier in the presentation. Not many were focusing on the soil, right? So technical seeds like, curriculum, reading programs, numeracy, all these assessment, all very, very important things. But when you plant these seeds, you rely on fertile soil. And what we realized was no one was actually making that soil fertile. So we felt that was a niche we could play that would be different in the space, going back to being standing out, right, in a sector. And if we could do that, everyone else's seeds would grow taller and faster. So it was scary because, for funders and many people, they didn't fully understand. This was a real leap in the dark, right? And this was not an area that people would think this requires much, focus. It's still sometimes a challenge as well. But I think, this idea of like, what can we do that really is unique, that can help the whole sector grow and develop, that's very authentic to us as leaders or to those in the sector. I think that way of thinking is there. So just think what's already out there. Let's not try and duplicate stuff, especially in the social sector where resources are scarce anyway. We don't know. So is there a niche? Is there an area we can take that is really very, very personal and unique to us that we can get very deeply immersed in that problem? And motivation was the ultimate wicked problem to try to address.
Thank you. Havish, Aditya, Abhishek, any questions or comments?
Yeah, I was thinking about the second principle, which engagement is king. So by that, do you mean we should stay engaged with the problem we choose and stay focused on it? And what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think so. What we're finding is, I think a lot of times, I don't know if this will resonate with you guys, but with my kids in London, but I think it's true in many metros in India now, we bombard our kids with all kinds of enrichment activities, right? So, 1 minute you're going to the soccer class, then to the ballet one, to then, whatever it might be. And what we're learning from all this stuff is it is close to useless because, we do so many things, we don't deeply engage. And because it's so programmed, every minute of many of our young children's lives is now structured that way. They don't have a chance to really be curious about things. It's almost been going from one class to the next. I remember at Cambridge, I was involved in a lot of activities at the beginning. My first year, I did maybe 10 or 12 different extracurricular things. But I was learning that, look, after a point, there's only so many meetings this is useful for. What are things I'm really passionate about? Let me go deep in those things. So if I'm doing a student volunteering service, let me really make it a great volunteering service and really reach lots of people. If I'm exploring the business club, for example, let's get some really great speakers and mentors into the university who can help many other people in the university realize their talents and nurture them, as we talked about. So the idea of sometimes we have a lot of pressure to tick boxes and to feel like, yeah, we've done this course, I've been to this talk. What matters much more is the spirit in which we engage with something. And are we really stretching ourselves? Are we being curious? Are we thinking critically about an area? Are we collaborating with others? Those transferable skills basically are the future of work. Those are skills that almost every employer, and if you look at this Confederation of Indian Industry, every report they write will talk about these skills. That's what employers will value more and more in the future. They already do value them, but that'll become the key they're looking for. So I think this idea of picking a few things, but really stretching ourselves and trying to make a real contribution to that is one of the keys that we're learning a lot about motivation and engagement for young people today. Did that answer your question, Lithian?
Yeah, and that's actually, I think, I'm facing the same problem. I'm kind of choosing one problem and then finding another problem, moving through that problem, and slowly I'm losing I'm losing my motivation completely to do anything at all.
Yeah, and I think this is something I definitely saw in a lot of young people in this, especially because I think there's so many, especially Ashoka, it's almost like you're in front of a buffet, right? Of like so many nice dishes out there and speakers and things coming all the time. And how do you choose, right? You get sort of sick because you try so many different things out. I think what's really important is to realize, look, life is we've got a long working life ahead of us. You're probably going to work about 90,000 hours in your life. Some of the research for the book was showing that you've got plenty of time to get immersed in other problems. But there's no point kind of, I don't know, for example, saying I'm going to focus on education to start with and then thinking about health all the time, right? I think for that period, say for the next 5 years, I'm going to throw everything at health or education, whatever the sector is you're interested in. Go deep, learn about it, really get to know people in it, build networks, make a real contribution. And if you do that, first of all, you'll have the confidence, you'll have the skill base, and the networks to go somewhere else and do something else and make a different contribution in another sector in the future. So it's really saying just focus on deep engagement, focus on that thing while it really is your wicked problem. And I think back to the stir example, don't worry so much about the solution and how you contribute will change over time. That's natural. But if you have that North Star of the problem in front of you, that's a huge motivator. I woke up every day knowing that, we were reaching, lakhs of teachers and children, and everything we did had a big impact. So you always wanted to get better so you could keep making more and more of an impact on the people we were helping and serving.
Can
Does that
I?
make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah, please.
it made sense. Can I ask a follow-up question, which is not exactly related to this? So, like as you mentioned, we can change things. You went from consulting to you worked on education for problem solving in education. You even talked about soil, and now you're writing this book about motivation. So, how easy was it for you to change things like that? Change your fields, specializations?
Yeah, I think being very honest, I think for the first part of my career, I was kind of what I guess I call CV chasing. Yeah, so I would be obsessed on what will this thing look on my CV, right? And I did a lot of 2-year stints where I didn't know it consciously, but I think in a way I was doing the shortest time imaginable, just to kind of make sure it looked respectable on the CV and move to the next role. And I was always obsessed about what happens next, what's the next career path, next promotion, what's my title say on the CV, and so on. I think the challenge in that stage of my life was one where I didn't go very deeply into those areas though. And it becomes quite superficial. And I think for me, like Stir as an example was where, I spent 10 years really working on something and really getting lost. And it was really, really tough, honestly, the hardest for 10 years of my life professionally, because there was almost no guidance, no easy answer to these questions. But you learned and met so many interesting people. You thought about this stuff so deeply. You learned to communicate and share your passion with other people. You built a huge global network through that whole process. It was actually remarkably easy to then say, okay, now I want to contribute to motivation, but much more broadly now by writing, as you said, by coaching, consulting, and so on. And I advise a number of organizations around the world now. But that all came from going very deep into one thing and then feeling like you've exhausted, you've given everything you can give to it, back to engagement. You then can take a lot with you to the next part of your journey. And we often have a lot of challenges in India with young staff, especially from top universities like Ashoka wasn't there yet, but those kinds of universities where I think there was a lot of this kind of CV jumping kind of mentality, right? Where every 2 years someone wants a hike or a title change and so on as well. And I'm not saying those are not, again, back to motivation thinking, that can be helpful to some extent, but that's not deeply motivating, right? What's much more deeply motivating is we have that sense of purpose and that sense of helping and serving others.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Michaela has posted a question going back to the fourth point when looking for talent nurture. What are the qualities we should look for?
Thanks, Michaela. Any ideas on this? Can anyone talk about maybe someone on campus that is, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but that is a great nurture to them? What do they do in terms of helping you in all the ways we described today in the talk?
I think when I go back to the people who nurtured me in my journey, one, they mostly helped me build those connections and those relationship skills. They connected me to a lot more people. They believed in my potential. I had nothing to prove to show to them that I've done the work. They knew that I'm deeply motivated by the wicked problem, as you say it. Back then, I'd started working on diversity and inclusion, and I still continue to work on it. So they could see that I'm deeply, deeply motivated by a wicked problem. I don't know the solution. And they just believed in my potential, helped me connect to people, helped me nurture my skills, gave me opportunities, which I think I didn't even deserve back then. But then they just kept on stretching my possibilities or potential so that I could see what more I can do.
It's a very powerful example, Anshul. I was talking to a business journalist in India this morning for Peace, and one of the things we were talking about is how nowadays in corporate India, for example, there isn't a lot of room for nurturing, right? Because there's a lot of pressure on short-term targets, profit targets, all these things. How do we create space for that to happen? I think a lot of nurturers in our lives have done it because almost despite the system around them. And I think one of the things we're trying to do with the book is we're doing a lot of workshops with CEOs and leaders around these ideas and saying, look, nurturing is part of what you do. It's not something that should be on the bottom of a job description or not even mentioned at all. It's really part of what any leader or manager should do. So how do we make that concept true as well?
Yes.
Any other thoughts there? Does anyone disagree with any of these? It's absolutely great if you do. I would love to. Any things where you found these kinds of insights haven't worked for you in life or in education? Yeah, Nishka, please.
I mean, it's not more for like disagreement. I just think that I was thinking about what worked for me. And in some cases, it hasn't been the sort of belief that I can do it. It's sort of also been to like question, to just sort of get me to a place where they don't give me an answer. They sort of help me reach one by constantly questioning my own assumptions or just things that I'm confused about, rather than just simply telling me, okay, this is how you can do it.
Yeah, Nishka, how did it feel? Was it because that was very even more confusing? Did you feel a bit lost through that, or tell me more about what happened there?
I'm so sorry. What
So you said you felt like you were not giving you an easy answer. Did that make you feel like you were getting more lost through that, or tell me more about what that meant in terms of that experience then?
I honestly felt good that it wasn't an easy answer, because I think in that moment when I really asked for advice, they sort of helped me in a direction that I could personally go in and get that answer for myself. They sort of told me, okay, you asked this question, it's a great first step, but sort of go in this direction and you might be able to answer your own question, because they felt the need that, okay, just telling me from their experience may not help. It's something I have to sort of experience for myself. So I think in the moment I was not happy with it, but after a while, it definitely sort of rang a bell.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think, one of the things we're learning a lot, and there's a great author called Ruchira Sharma, who's also written a book called The Coaching method. I'm reading that right now. Actually, I had a chance to talk to her a couple of weeks ago. But this idea that, all of us, this idea of coaching skill set. I became a coach last year, and that idea of a coaching style, even if you're not a professional coach, it's such an important skill set. So this idea of asking the right questions at the right time. I think it's very easy for us to jump often, especially if you've got some experience, to jumping into this is the right answer, right? And this is what you should do. I think people who can really ask those questions and give space for people to reflect on their lives and how these things relate to them, I think, is where we can really be great nurturers in that example. Cool. Any other questions? Or if not, we can just wrap up with a few ideas of how to take some of these ideas forward. But any final thoughts or comments from anyone in the group? No, just having a look. So thanks guys for the discussion. I wanted to ask a couple of things, just ways to really engage further, and then some ideas for us as well. I think one that I'd love to do is just on the book, love your thoughts and ideas. It's on the Kindle now. It's very easy to get, and on real paperback and so on in India. But what we're trying to do with this, and it goes back to what you were saying actually before, Nishka, around this idea that the book is not here to try to create, give easy answers, right? That just don't exist. It's such a complex world. And what we're trying to do in the book is look at all of these key areas of our lives, right? Education, work, careers, parenting, relationships, citizenship. It's too hard to try and boil that down to simple, here's a 3-step guide to do it, but trying to create that reflective space. And one of the things we're toying with, so love your thoughts in the book, first of all, that would be amazing to hear, but also please share this stuff out more widely. I'd love to see if we can get the video on other students discussing it. And one thing we're just trying to toy with, and if there are any early volunteers, Michaela will put her email down in the chat. I'll also give you my social media handles as well. But we're trying to see if we might create some circles around the world where groups of people can come and talk about some of the ideas in the book, more as a way of a space for them to reflect on what matters to them. So they may want to do a session on work, for example, what it means, or education, what it means for them, and so on. Because what we're finding that the book is doing is opening up space for lots and lots of conversations. If any of you is completely free, we're going to create some resources out there that are completely free, open source to use. And we're really excited about this idea of many different people from many different backgrounds engaging in these conversations around the world. If any of you are interested in volunteering for this, let Michaela know. We're not organizing in a traditional sense. It's very much driven by those who want to do it. But we're looking for some people who want to pilot this with us in the coming months. Please reach out. Please spread the word more generally to others on campus also. But these are also my contact details and social media handles on there. Please connect on LinkedIn or Twitter. But just more generally, I guess it's such an exciting place and such an amazing part of your lives now. I look back at my time on campus, both undergraduate and postgraduate. It's such a great chance to learn more deeply about who we are and try to really figure out what deeply motivates and engages us. I hope these 5 sort of ideas are helpful for us to think about how we do that. And I think this was all initially lodged on or positioned around this idea of careers in the social sector. I guess my key message is that in a way, what you do on campus matters much more than kind of looking for the dream job and trying to do that. All that will happen naturally. I know there's a great career service at Ashoka who will help you in all these things. But if you can really seize the bull by the horns in terms of how you currently engage in what's happening in your academics and wider life, it'll be immensely valuable to your careers ahead and to your futures as well. So yeah, thanks guys for the time, and look forward to stay in touch as well. Thanks, Anshul, for the help in getting today happening.
Thank you so much, Sharath. Thank you. Certainly very, very interesting points that you shared. Going to note them, think about it a little more, especially wicked problem that resonated the most with me. Thank you so much, and have a great time, everyone. If you have any feedback for us, please feel free to reply on the mail trail, and looking forward to connect later. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. Bye. See you.